Welcome back to another episode of the Quillette podcast. You're with me, Zoe Booth, and today I'm with Giancarlo Dimaggio, a psychiatrist and psychotherapist who is based in Rome. His primary interest is personality disorders, which we talk a lot about, and specifically narcissistic personality disorder. He's the co-founder of the Centro di Terapia Metacognitive Interpersonale, which I assume means Center of Metacognitive Therapy or Metacognitive Interpersonal Therapy. Got it. He's also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Psychology Session and a senior associate editor of the Journal of Psychotherapy Integration. We talk about whether it's true that there's more narcissists out there now because of social media, whether there are more female or male narcissists, whether the dark triad personality is real, and we also talk about Jordan Peterson's Big Five personality test and whether it's a legit test. We talk about those topics and so much more, so stay tuned. I hope you really like this podcast. If you do, please share it widely. Without much further ado, let's get into this conversation with Giancarlo Dimaggio. Giancarlo, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored.
You're an expert in personality disorders, and I'm very interested in your work, your research. You've got, how many citations do you have now? Quite a lot.
I can't remember the citation, but my Scopus Hirsch index is actually 56.
So that's quite high, right?
It is quite high. Consider that in the field, I'm probably the psychotherapist with the highest H index in Italy, I think. And
wow,
it's pretty good, I think.
Wow. So it's a privilege to be talking to you today, and hopefully you don't diagnose me with anything.
No, I wouldn't do it.
So tell me a bit about your research. I know you're an expert in personality disorders, but what exactly is a personality disorder?
Well, the very core of personality disorder is that their suffering lies in the interpersonal domain. So they have symptoms because one is maybe thinking that people with personality disorders make other people suffer. This is not true. That is, they suffer a lot. They suffer more than people with pure symptom disorders, but they have very difficulty engaging, maintaining, and making sense of enjoying interpersonal relationship. So that is the hardcore of personality disorder pathology, and some are proposing to name them interpersonal disorders. So this is the very core. So they have, they don't trust the other. They cling to others. They swing from extreme dependency, from distancing. Some of them withdraw constantly. So that's a range of interpersonal issues.
So you compared them to symptom-based disorders, is that right?
Yes, the classic diagnosis was symptom disorders, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, mood disorders in general, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and personality disorders. Well, this is not carving nature at its joints, because people with personality disorders have a lot of symptom disorders. In general, they are just a bit more difficult, sometimes much more difficult, to engage in treatment and keep them in treatment until it works.
How many people have personality disorders?
Well, it depends very much on how do you assess them. A very rough estimate would be around 10% of the general population, but it's very rough.
Mm-hmm. And the most common ones?
The most common ones, again, it depends on how you measure. Probably the most clinically significant are borderline personality disorders, which covers kind of 20% of people having personality disorders, and avoidant personality disorder, which is related to poor social engagement, social withdrawal, and poor interpersonal functioning. So the more withdrawn and shy people. So maybe these are the two most frequent / relevant.
Wow, it must be hard to draw the line between someone who's just shy compared to someone with an actual avoidant personality disorder.
This is important, because usually personality disorder are, in a way, you can consider extreme manifestations of natural tendencies. Okay, so if you're a solitary hunter in Scandinavia, and you spend most of your time alone, but you don't suffer. It's your ecological niche. Okay, so you're good. But if you live in the center of Milan, for example, or Rome, and you tend to be very shy and not engage with others, these can come with suffering and dysfunctioning. So the core feeling is normal, is human. Shyness is human. We all can be shy at times, but when it interferes with your functioning and deprives you of chances to live a fulfilled, satisfying life, and it comes with suffering, then you are in the domain of a personality disorder.
Right. Okay. So it's sort of a scale because obviously there are some people who are more narcissistic than others.
It's about suffering and functioning. These are the two major criteria. If you suffer and have problems in society, well, these cannot be good to you.
So you are an expert in all personality disorders, but perhaps most specifically you focus on narcissistic personality disorder, which everyone is talking about at the moment. It's like every second conversation I have, people tell me, oh, my father-in-law is a narcissist or my ex-boyfriend is a narcissist or whatever. But what really is narcissistic personality disorder?
Well, actually, studying and understanding and treating personality disorders is more than an interest, but it's probably a personal curse. I should have done something bad in my previous lives, and now I'm paying the toll. And well, the way people talk about narcissism in social media and in everyday conversation is pure craziness. It's nonsense. Everyone who struggled with someone in a romantic relationship, then okay, he generally it is a he was a narcissist. It doesn't make sense. And the picture that social media and people who make money out of it of narcissism or pathological narcissism is just ridicule. And it's like these people spend their life manipulating and taking advantage of other people just for the sake of the predatory motive or just out of pure evil. It doesn't make any sense, and it is a very powerful strategy to engage people in a platform, in a website, in a social media pages, but it doesn't correspond almost at all with the real picture of what is a personality disorder. It's a disease, it's a condition. And people with narcissistic personality disorder suffer. They suffer a lot. They suffer from anxiety, depression. They are very prone to experiencing guilt, which is the last thing one can think of people with narcissism, but they are prone to guilt and shame. And as time passes, they can commit suicide in the second half of life, where they have to confront themselves with the fact that their grandiose expectations remain unmet. So it's past, I cannot dream of it anymore, and I have no alternatives. So it is a disorder. Can they be stressful to others? Yes, they are. As with any other disease and as with any other psychological condition, of course, it can be stressful to relatives, partners, people who are around us. That's normal. I'm not saying they are pleasant. They can be quite problematic, especially in romantic life, at work also. But the very victims of narcissism is people who suffer from the disorder. So
So we should feel sorry for them.
I'm not asking that much for people who have been in touch with someone with serious narcissism, but actually is a condition that needs understanding and treating. And what you read in social media, it's they are emotional vampire, they gaslight, they do orbiting, love bombing, whatever. It's just nonsense, and it is a way to attract people who then will label themselves as victims of narcissism, while they would better think of themselves as people suffering from something that is inside. And if I may add one last thing, and many of people who complain about my former partner was a narcissist, my relative, my colleague, do suffer from what I call narcissism by proxy. So they need to, engage themselves in high status people. So they want to idolize something because of their own narcissistic expectation. They are striving for grandiosity, and then they get rejected, and their complaints are out of narcissistic frustration. It's very hard to say, but this corresponds.
Fascinating. And is it gendered? Are there more male or female narcissists?
Well, it is a bit gendered, but kind of the split is 70-30, more or less.
Male or female?
Male are more narcissistic than
Okay.
women, but there are many narcissistic women. The purest example of a narcissistic woman is the main character of The Devil Wears Prada.
Yes.
And she was a grandiose narcissist, full blown.
So you mentioned grandiose
Yeah.
narcissist. Am I right in thinking there's also a vulnerable narcissist? Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Because people mostly think about people who are very boastful, arrogant, and they do exist, by the way. But what we mostly see in a clinical room is people with the so-called vulnerable narcissism, which is people who have grandiose expectations. So they would like to be considered as special and superior, but they conceal a deeply sense of poor self-esteem, fragility, and inferiority, and they are very they are to feeling resentful, to harbor fantasies of vengeance. They are very envious, but mostly they suffer a lot. The bigger picture is that the distinction between grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism is not so clear cut. So there are people who tend to harbor more in their grandiose self and they suffer a bit less, still dysfunctional, but they suffer a bit less. And people whose self esteem and level of narcissism oscillates during the day and during the week. And these people suffer a lot more, and we see them in psychotherapy much.
Hmm. So you're saying you see more vulnerable narcissists than grandiose?
Yes, and they need treatment. Another bias is people with narcissism send other people to psychotherapy because they make them suffer, but they don't go to psychotherapy. No, no, it's not true. We see a lot of people with narcissism in our clinical rooms.
Do people know they're narcissists?
Sometimes they don't because I'm just superior. That's the way I
Mm.
am. This is what they show. Of course, they conceal a different attitude. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. So it is not
Fascinating.
completely unconscious. Sometimes people, the fun fact is that if they don't read social media, who label them as monsters, people can be somewhat proud of being narcissists because they equate it with being superior.
Hmm.
So they can get some fun out of it.
Interesting. Have you heard of this term, the dark triad or
Yes,
tetrad personality traits? What do you think
yes.
about that?
Well, it is a research in the non-clinical area, and it's a measure that combines three different traits. That is psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and which is the tendency to deceive and manipulate for personal purposes, and narcissism. And it is associated with some misdeeds in personal life, but again with more social dysfunctions, with the exceptions of people who are highly skilled and maybe intelligent. Maybe they can become the white collar criminals. In general, the dark triad is not good for those who endorse them. But then, probably the dark triad is one of the responsible for the negative impression people have of narcissism because it includes two elements which are linked to the predatory motive, that is psychopathy and Machiavellianism, okay, which is not inherent to narcissism. So these people enact bad actions and make other people suffer. They exploit them, but not out of narcissism, but out of two of the other components, that is psychopathy and Machiavellianism. And so that's a problem. And, in a way, the dark triad is the non-clinical side of the so-called malignant narcissism. And I want to be clear, malignant narcissism doesn't exist. It was just created by the great psychoanalyst, I have to say, Otto Kernberg, but it relates to something else. It is more antisocial personality disorder. So it's better people don't use the term malignant narcissism.
So antisocial personality disorders. What makes someone, how do you define antisocialness?
But it's a general tendency to, again, break the rule, violate the norms, act selfish, and again, act out of the predatory motive, not caring for the consequences on
Yeah.
others, which is not the motive that drives people with narcissism, by the way.
Now, there are so many different personality tests out there in pop culture. You know, lots of people know about the Myers-Briggs tests, but there's also, you know, Jordan Peterson has a test, the Big Five personality test or Ocean. I did that. I was under the impression that it was quite a legitimate test. And I suggest that, you know, when I first met my boyfriend, I was like, do this test and we'll see if we're compatible. And we seem to be so far. What do you think about that test, the Big Five Ocean test?
Well, I know the Big Five. It is probably
Yeah.
the most used test in personality psychology, not personality disorder psychology, but personality psychology. Well, it's huge, it's reliable, a lot of studies predict something. Do I like it? Not so much, because it's like, it's not my metaphor, but it's like describing a car from its appearance. And
Okay.
so Big Five doesn't give you a sense of people inner functioning, which is way more complex. But in general, my advice is testing are good if delivered by a specialist when you have a problem and you need to understand your functioning. In
Yes.
pop culture, I would say don't use them, just live your life and you will be much better.
Well, this leads me to my next question. How good are we at telling the story of who we are? Are we reliable storytellers?
Mostly we are not. And,
Mm.
we tend to unconsciously lie about ourselves. So we are not very good in telling the very motives that drive ourselves to act. And I can say I'm a good father, and I can think I'm a good father, but when you observe me with my sons, it's not personal, by the way. I just become very edgy and nervous. I yell at them, no patience, prefer going to play tennis or paddle or whatever. And so that's the truth. So, self statements are usually very biased. And sometimes they are ridden with self justifications or with idealization. Just a simple example, if you ask some people in psychotherapy, how was your family? And they say, well, no, that's normal, that's good. A nice environment, they were kind. So that's what they can tell. But when you come with time after some sessions and you explore for specific episodes with some difficulties, and they are able to tell fragments, days, periods of their real story, well, the picture that pops up is completely different. So you discover experiences of neglect, mental illness, struggles, sometimes, emotional violence, and they were honest at the beginning. It's just that they tended to recall, a self-serving version of their history. That is why skilled cllinicians and dealing with patients in general, personality disorder more specifically, don't rely on the overgeneralized cognitive ideas about self, the others, and the world that patients use. We want for episodes because episodes include action and action tendencies, and action tendencies tell the truth of who we are.
Interesting. So you want to hear what happened and how they reacted to it.
Before being psychotherapists, we need investigative journalists. Tell me the story, the why, the where, the when, the who, and the plot, and there you can search, inquiry, and discover the personal truth. That's what the person actually thinks and feel, and the reason for why they behave.
Can you trust the way someone describes a situation? For example, one person can feel like one person was yelling at them and abusing them, and another person might feel like, oh, they were just a bit angry, whatever.
Again, the truth is in the story. In general, we need to trust our patients. We need to have confidence in their reports, and it's rare that they lie. Some people lie, but it can be court mandated, or someone suffering from alcohol and drug abuse or some other disorders. They tend to hide information for a series of reasons, but in general, we tend to believe our patients. What we do is dig deeper and explore the story, the episode, and then the truth comes out. And there is a very important of truth, that is, if you dig deeper and something, so to speak, true emerges, the person changes face, the arousal changes, they display new communicative signals, which means you have broken the protective mechanism and you have entered their soul.
Interesting. What do you mean by soul, by the way?
No, it was just a metaphor. Their inner word.
Very Italian of you.
No, I would never repeat it again.
Okay. Um, how much does our childhood have to do with our personalities today, and whether or not we have personality disorders?
Wow, this is a very important question, and this is very important in modern times because you are more or less implicitly pointing at the nature versus nurture question. Is who we are today is the result of our family, of our childhood, of the social world, or it is about genetics. And well, it is a question that, honest to God, it is impossible to disentangle. So when you see that personality is a social construction, this is just pure nonsense. And this is also true when you hear that personality is about genetics. It's about temperament, which is your constitutional aspect of who we are. And I would be quite generic, and this is probably the best answer you can get. It is a mixture. It is very, very likely that childhood history, especially family events, shape your personality. Okay, that makes sense. And of course, the presence of some adverse conditions, neglect, sometimes violence, by the way, constant criticism, an atmosphere of fear, an atmosphere of anxiety, an atmosphere of mistrust against the world and the society and the neighborhood, and can shape the lenses you will use when making sense of your life when you're an adult.
Can you change your personality?
Well, first, actually, personality is not carved in stone. It can spontaneously change. And it does to a certain extent. I don't remember the quantity of personality that is prone to spontaneous change during the lifetime, but it can change. And personality disorders can change a bit so spontaneously. Some of them can soften during the years, probably borderline personality disorder, which is much about impulsivity and emotional dysregulation, can benefit of growing because you tend to be less emotionally reactive. And but then on the other side, you pay the price of the problems you had sooner. But in general, it can improve. But what I can tell is that personality disorders should be changed with treatment, so they can be addressed with psychotherapy, and that was the goal of my life as a professional.
So what's the difference between psychotherapy and your general psychologist?
Well, psychotherapy is a science, is delivered by trained professional, possibly with a long training in psychopathology, in understanding how to treat people. So it's very specialized. So you need to be a qualified psychotherapist. I know in Italy you can be a psychotherapist only if you are a certified psychotherapist, having followed 4-year training school, or you are a psychiatrist. I know that in other countries, you can be a psychotherapist even if you're a nurse or a social worker. So it may change according to legislation. But, psychotherapy is a combination of understanding the problem and being able to deliver techniques. So it's very specialized. You are not just a psychology and a psychotherapist. You need to become a psychotherapist with hard work.
Is it true that Freud was the first psychotherapist?
No, not at all. And I'm now trying to make a lot of people nervous, but to me, modern psychotherapy would have been better and progress would have been faster if the main inspiration of modern psychotherapy was Pierre Janet instead of Freud. Pierre Janet was a French thinker, and his understanding of dissociation, his use of many techniques, behavioral exposure, hypnosis, other kind of experiential work is much psychotherapy as we do it today, as his understanding of human mind is much more consistent with modern science than Freud. Freud was great, of course, a great thinker, but also great in creating a social network.
What do you mean by social network?
He was influential. He created a society. He was able to attract followers. Pierre Janet was a lone wolf, more.
Interesting.
So kind of social withdrawal. But, modern psychotherapy, cognitive psychotherapists for sure, pay much more of a debt to Pierre Janet than to Freud. Pierre Janet spoke about the importance of the transference relationship, what happens between patient and therapist. Of course, Freud said a lot more about the subject. But again, I consider myself much more of a nephew of Janet than of Freud.
What is transference exactly?
Transference is the way any patient, constructs the therapist. So we enter the therapy room not neutrally. We have our own pre-existing schemas and patterns, and we instinctively apply to the therapist. For example, I tend to consider myself weak, stupid, inept, and to consider the others are superior, harsh, judgmental. So I enter my room. I have something to disclose: vulnerability, mistakes I've done, failures, whatever. And in a way, my transfers is that I will expect the therapist will criticize.
So, do psychotherapists get their own psychotherapy?
In general, yes. Different schools have different attitudes. Of course, psychoanalysis requires as a necessary requisite. Cognitive school, not so much. But in Italy, the situation is complex. In general, also cognitive schools ask you for doing your own psychotherapy. My personal position is you shouldn't have psychotherapy because you're forced to, because then it can be fake. But then during supervision, your supervisor discovers your blind spots, your soft spots, your vulnerabilities, and then it is better than you go and have your personal psychotherapy. Otherwise, your personal histories, your former traumas and ghosts that still haunt you, this is much Italian, I can say, and will influence the way you are in the room. So you better keep them where they should be, that is in your past.
Yeah. Do you think there's a risk that, well, people talk about it all the time, like, oh, I don't believe in psychiatrists or even psychologists because they, lift the lid off something that needs to stay in there and it's actually really dangerous. And what do you think about that?
I think that is the same that, people can believe that the earth is flat, that vaccines cause autism, that the nuclear is the most dangerous form of energy that exists. People can believe everything. And the answer is up to science. And science says that psychotherapy helps. In general, having psychotherapy when you need it, or by the way, you don't need psychotherapy if you don't suffer from a condition, from a disease, but in general, it gives more benefit than harm. And there is a question that I concede that so far adverse effects of psychotherapies have not been sufficiently explored. So we want to know more of them. And last wave or randomized control trial is the incidence of adverse events. And that is very important because it boosts credibility in our profession. But in general, psychotherapy is trying to be a science. It's a science and it can be improved, yes, a lot, but it helps.
Hmm. You said before that it's not helpful to force psychotherapy,
Yeah.
but for people, I'm not sure if have you worked with criminals or people in jails or anything like
Uh,
that?
Not personally, but with a couple of colleagues, one of them in Australia, by the way, and we work on men who enacted domestic violence, and
Okay.
so court mandated.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to draw a line. Some of them enter your room just because they were said so. And if they have some psychopathic traits and just are convinced that acting violence is okay, is normal, and you can't do much with them. But with many others, even if they acted something criminal or something violent in their couple relationship, well, they do out of psychological reasons that can be addressed. That is, some personality disorders, emotional dysregulation, alcohol and drug abuse. So, if you treat the underlying problems, who then made that person be violent, psychologically, physically, coercive towards their partner, well, you can treat them successfully.
I there's a lot of discussion now that people have less faith in institutions, and there seems to be more mistrust and erring on conspiracy theories out there. I don't have the exact evidence that there are more conspiratorial people, but it definitely feels like that. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I honestly have some thoughts, not evidence. So it's more, I know I am a scientist, so I always try to distinguish between my opinions and facts proven by numbers. And so this lies more in the area of personal opinions. But we often hear that we live in a narcissistic era, and there is no evidence at all about that. And people can display their images in social media. They look splendid, they look beautiful, but this is not narcissist because if you observe these people out of the camera, they are consumed by insecurity and they would hardly show their body as it is because of fear of judgment. That is not much narcissism, by the way. But in general, we cannot speak. And there is something that is growing that is a combination of group thinking and mistrust. Well, mistrust and group thinking are probably the phenomenon I observe more, and they are the features of paranoid disorder, which is a combination of deeply seated sense of personal vulnerability with the ideas that others are powerful, malignant, intrusive, controlling, abusive, domineering. So this undermines the possibility to trust others because I'm always on ward and I don't want to be caught off guard. So I tend to mistrust. And what social media give to these people is a sense of community. Because if you live with this belief and you are on your village 30, 40 years ago, you were alone. But then you enter any platform and you see other people who have the same feelings and belief, and then you form alliances. And that's a problem because something that can be crazy then becomes a group thinking. It becomes a legitimate idea. And this is a problem. And consider that also trust is fundamental for human relationship. The majority of our interchanges in daily life are based on trust. We need to consider the other as someone who is just telling the truth, a partial truth, because it makes the conversation smoother. You cannot question everything the other say. But when you come to be suspicious or mistrustful in general, your interactions become difficult. Of time, they lack any harmony, and so it creates a more hostile, unfriendly, and distant atmosphere, which is, I think, this is what we are all are witnessing.
So social media plays a role in that, you believe?
Again, I have no data, but I would bet my money that they play a role in that.
Because our style of communication has changed and more communication is happening online than it used to. That's for sure.
Yes, online communication fosters a lot of biases, and consider that in general, under the influence of emotions, we resort to fast track cognitive strategies to make sense of interactions. That is normal, nothing strange. I cannot reason for hours every time I have to take a decision. We take 1,000 decisions per day. But when the communication is designed in a way to foster, to enhance your negative emotions, which actually looks like social media do, then you will have less resources and time to correct your emotional reasoning bias. And so, in general, the reasoning is damaged, is poorer, and more open to biases like confirmation bias. The better safe than sorry strategy. Better safe than sorry means if I hear a rumor in the forest, it's better you think it's a lion and then fly away, and because if you make a mistake, you're dead. So better safe than sorry. But if you apply this reasoning out of the jungle, it makes you either more anxious or more prone to react with anger. So you resort more quickly to fight flight strategies. And that's not good for social interactions.
Could you tell me a bit about your therapy? I'm not sure if you came up with it, but it's metacognitive interpersonal therapy. Did you found this therapy or?
No, no, it's something that me and my colleagues over the years actually designed, and it is part of the family of cognitive therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, though it is in depth with a lot of other influences, experiential therapies, psychoanalysis, of course, and very, I'm critic of many of current psychoanalytic tenets, but it has been, it still is a major influence. And it's different than standard cognitive behavioral therapy for a lot of reasons. First, we always focused on personality disorders. And then the major adjustments we made is that first, you have to make people become more aware of their stream of consciousness on the ground that they often are not able to report their actual thoughts and feelings. So it's not just I think and I feel, but there's some information missing. You're just saying you're tense, you're just saying you're nervous, you're edgy. Not enough. Please tell me the episodes. And then we dig into the episodes, and we observe the embodied reactions to human interaction during the episodes. For example, I can say during this interview, I'm okay. Oh, Giancarlo, how went the interview? Oh, that was great. But then, if you dig into what happened when Zoe asked you that question, and you dig into my reaction, and I observe deeply, I can detect some tension, maybe in the chest. I'm just pretending now. Maybe in the chest, maybe in the arms, and I can realize, well, Giancarlo, no, maybe you were not that good. If you dig deeper, in that moment, you were afraid, you could not answer. You were afraid your answer didn't make any sense. You were afraid that your Italian accent was ridiculous. So you were ashamed. So I will tell my friends the interview went great. This is what I will tell, by the way. But then if you ask and explore in the episode, you can detect vulnerabilities. And that's what we do with patients. And then there are a lot of instruments in order to make them change their perspective and find healthier way to see themselves and the world. And last thing, we try to make it empirically supported because, again, I reason as a scientist. We have a number of studies, some randomized control trial. The most recent is on an adaptation of on eating disorders, just published on a major journal. And we need more evidence, but current evidence say it is good.
Could you give us a brief summary of your work on eating disorders?
Yes, it's mostly done with my colleague in Verona who owns a center, private center for the treatment of eating disorders, Gloria Fioravanti. And we run a randomized control trial and we combine some of the usual techniques of cognitive behavior therapy enhanced, which is the most used treatment for eating disorders in adults, with our own understanding of personality disorders. So, very in a nutshell, it is about monitoring what happens in that person related to weight, eating behaviors, eating worries during the day, and exploring, providing the correct information for how to eat and other issues. But then we dig for interpersonal episodes. Okay, but what happened before? And we try to understand the interpersonal roots contributing to maintaining eating disorders. For example, I tend to eat under the influence of dysregulated anxiety, shame, and anger after an argument with my mother. So the eating disorder behavior is the final outcome in that specific case of something where the real problem was in that interaction. Okay. So we try to both regulate eating behaviors and address the underlying reasons. So, very in a nutshell. And it
Very
works.
fascinating and important work that you do in helping people.
Thank you very much. We are very happy because it was a small pilot trial, but in the psychotherapy of personality disorders, and even more in the psychotherapy of eating disorders, the major problem is that patients drop out of treatment 20 to 40, 50%, depends on the studies, depend on the approaches. Of course, if a person doesn't complete treatment, it doesn't work. And all the studies we delivered in metacognitive interpersonal therapy and in adaptation to eating disorders, well, we were able to contain dropout to a very low rate, around 10%, which I think is a great result, and we are trying to replicate it, but just crossing fingers.
Great. Well, good luck with it.
Thank you.
Okay. We've been going for almost 50 minutes. I think we should wrap it up. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Uh, no, I think we're done. We covered a lot of issues, and I think
We covered
people,
a lot.
yeah.
It's fascinating. You're very easy to talk to.
You too. You were very able to improvise, and our conversation went into a different direction than we planned, and that is great. It was very smooth. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Zoe, for giving me this opportunity.